From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is Tony Shaffer, Senior Fellow at the London Centre for Policy Research. And on that note, we will go to our first issue, which is Issue 1, Trump versus Mueller. In a series of tweets, President Trump this week called on Attorney General Jeff Sessions to end Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia. Again decrying a quote-unquote witch hunt, Mr. Trump also lamented the start of his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort's trial in federal court. Manafort, Trump said, is being treated worse than, get this, the Chicago outfit boss Al Capone. And note another incident from this week. Facebook announced that it recently deleted a number of malicious accounts on its social media platforms. The company says that the pages and profiles involved were being used to target this November's midterm elections. But while Facebook says it does not yet know who was responsible for setting up the accounts, members of Congress say that if a foreign state is to blame, it will face new U.S. sanctions. Pat, why is Trump upping the ante against Mueller now? And secondly, if Facebook does identify with the U.S. intelligence community a foreign actor, should they be sanctioned?
Well, whoever the foreign actors are should be retaliation against them. But what Trump is clearly exasperated and angry at what's going on in all sorts of areas here, Cohen and other things. But what he ought to do is just stay out of it. Do not talk to Mueller. Mueller's not going to indict him. He can't indict him. Let Mueller make his report, send it up to the House of Representatives. We all know what Mueller's got so far that's in public, and nobody's going to impeach the president on that. And he ought to, frankly, show a little more patience on this thing. I think he can win this battle once it gets in the public sector. I'm not sure the Democratic Party is interested in moving for an impeachment right now, or even if they win the House.
Eleanor.
Trump wants to fire Mueller. If he fires Mueller before the midterms, the Republicans will lose even more seats, and they're already on pace to lose. If he doesn't fire Mueller, he knows even more perhaps than what Mueller knows what they have on him, and it's not pretty. The Manafort trial is the opening gambit here. It's back to Watergate, it's follow the money, it's who's in hock to Russian oligarchs who are connected to Putin. So I think that's where we are with that. As far as Facebook, we've now learned in chapter and verse what we already knew a year ago and what we suspected a year and a half ago. And we have one party in Congress that voted down money to protect our electoral system. We have one party that is complicit in what the Russians are doing.
Tony.
On the Facebook thing first, look, if we're here because the Obama administration never pushed back against our adversaries, not once. And if you don't push back, they will increase what they're doing. That's why we're here. Regarding the election, look, I work personally on the legislation regarding protecting the election. The way to protect the election is paper ballots and voter ID. We're not willing to do that, so I don't know where we're going to go if we don't do that. Regarding this whole issue of that, though, we've got to do something to establish an understanding of what the policy is against foreign adversaries. We don't even have a clear policy on that.
Would you retaliate?
Absolutely. We've actually developed scenarios to do that, but it's not the lack of capability, it's the lack of policy willingness, and that's something that has to be debated. Back on the Manafort issue and Mueller. Look, Mueller is going to the theater of the absurd. He's actually going up to visit with the madame who provided, I think Kristen Davis is her name. Unless he's going up to get a group rate, he's talking to the same madame who was actually furnishing prostitutes to Elliot Spitzer. Where is this going? Right. And so I understand the president's frustration.
Who else she was providing prostitutes for? She was a very successful woman who has a lot of connections that Mueller's justifiably curious about. I wouldn't say Obama didn't push back. If the Obama administration hadn't pushed back against Putin, Putin wouldn't have been so mad at Hillary Clinton. I mean, he thought she was trying to influence their elections, which she was, and influence those demonstrations out there on the streets. Maybe you're talking about, but he wasn't aggressive enough about pursuing the meddling that our intelligence discovered was happening before the election, because he was worried about blowback that people would think he was trying to make a distracting issue. But getting back to the Manafort trial, I can't help but think the timing of Obama's tweet rage, excuse me,
Trump's
tweet rage. I get my president's mixed
I
up.
I wish Obama would have a tweet rage.
Wonderful memories, but well, we will see after Labor Day. But anyway, no, the Manafort trial, I think, was what touched off Trump's little rage there. You know, because he sees the pressure coming. I can't help but believe. I mean, he behaves like a guilty man. He's been doing this for a long time, and you just watch the way,
he
reacts.
Look, Trump clearly. Look, this is not good for the United States of America. We spent a year and a half convulsing over the fact that the Russians hacked John Podesta. For heaven's sakes, they compare it with Pearl Harbor. We bring out all these intelligence agents, top of the line for the United States. We're going to say we're going to fight back. Act as though this is Pearl Harbor.
We have a president who has an asterisk after his name. This was not a properly conducted election, and if he and his campaign were in cahoots with an adversarial foreign power, that is something the American people need to know, and that Robert Mueller is justifiably going to get to the bottom of.
The left cannot stop talking about anything else. This is all they talk about.
Healthcare, we talk about that a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about healthcare. I'm good with
all
that
due
too.
respect, look, two agencies and one organization said there was some Russian meddling, NSA and FBI. And CIA somewhat said it, even though CIA has no ability to detect it. CIA does agent operations.
They have their ways.
I'm CIA trained. I know what CIA does. Thank you.
They have their ways.
With that said, and then the conclusion of Jim Clapper was not necessarily supported by the evidence. So what I'm saying is that the whole thing of 17 agencies saying that there was is false.
That's
so
your
I think the propaganda.
That's your opinion,
No,
sir.
it's fact.
No,
that's in
not
the report
fact.
from the ODNI.
But you know, this is a victory. Excuse me, this is a victory for Vladimir Putin.
Yes, exactly.
Or that little Russian agents who did this, they probably can't buy a drink anywhere in Moscow. People are, here you go, great job.
They're dead, Pat. He kills them, bury the evidence.
Look, they're dead. They're probably getting Kremlin stars.
All right, we go on to our next issue, which is issue 2, honored return.
And we say to you, as one people with one voice, welcome home.
The US military this week honored the return of 55 fallen service personnel from the Korean War. There is hope that DNA testing will show the remains to belong to some of the more than 5,000 US military personnel recorded as missing in action from the Korean War. Fought between 1950 and 1953, that war cost the lives of more than 36,000 Americans and at least 1 million individuals in total. Still, while President Trump thanked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for repatriating the remains and apparently sending him a pleasant letter, some are concerned that North Korea is not committed to denuclearization. After all, also this week, the Washington Post reported on new North Korean efforts to build liquid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, that could strike U.S. cities. North Korea also continues to develop its nuclear warhead re-entry vehicles and other final-stage ICBM capabilities.
Eleanor, where's the diplomatic track?
This is what happens when you front load the diplomatic track and you give away the biggest card you have, which is the summit and all the attention that this president gave to Chairman Kim. You can't have that event again. I do believe the North Koreans have an entirely different interpretation of what it means to denuclearize. It has nothing to do with what Trump thinks. And let's see how many of those remains are actually U.S. servicemen remains. They did repatriate some 200 remains when Bill Clinton was president. Only a small fraction of them actually were identified. This is a game that the Koreans have played for a long time, and Trump wants the rest of us to believe he somehow made history. He hasn't.
Look, Kim Jong-un is going to retain his nuclear weapons, at least some of those nuclear weapons. Let me say this. Vice President Pence was magnificent in his speech there. And I can still remember those guys were at the Chosin Reservoir. They were
Frozen
all brought
Chosin.
back. That General Chesty Puller was down there. They're one of the greatest American Marines of all time. It was very well done. I was a kid and can remember that to these days. So that is a good thing. But I do agree, Kim Jong-un is he's interested in development right now and détente. That is a good thing. But we're not going to get all those weapons out. And I think we should have known that from the beginning.
I think Kim Jong-un understands President Trump's fascination with photo ops, and being able to present a great public image that is not attached to the reality of our diplomacy. Get it in writing. Whatever happened to that phrase
well, they have a framework
in Trump's vocabulary. You know, I mean, he acts like everything is all settled and implemented when it's not. The North Koreans are perfectly free right now to go ahead and develop their nuclear weapons, and President Trump is free to ignore that.
And we've given up the military exercises, which was
No,
another
they were
card
suspended.
that we had.
They were suspended. We're continuing.
Okay,
we are continuing to deploy anti-missile capability to Hawaii. I've been meeting with a number of members of the Pentagon, and Tulsi Gabbard, Representative Gabbard, who is going against her own caucus, by the way, demanding we put military weapons there to defeat the missiles. That's still ongoing. And the other thing, remember, Eleanor, is that
so
we're
it's
talking
all coming
about,
up rosy
we're
in
talking
your
about
view?
50 years of momentum of society. This society, North Korea, has been told we're the bad guys. We're now working on something called de-escalation ladders. It's going to take some time to convince not only UN.
Do you think
but
it's
its
on the right
military.
track?
It's going to take time, but yes, it is. I mean, there's a great deal of study going on behind the scenes of how to walk them off the edge. These people have been postured to attack for the past 50 years.
I don't think so, but I hope you're right.
This is not easy.
Is there any belief, do you think, in Washington, really from anyone of power, that the military option is still viable?
No, the military option has always been
they got
unthinkable.
Nuclear weapons.
Right.
They got nuclear weapons. 900,000 troops on the DMZ.
Let's ask the
Well,
colonel.
look, you have to make them believe it's on the table and viable. One of the things we've done, again, we stood toe-to-toe at the demilitarized zone. This war has never ended. It's at an armistice. So you have people, and
do you have confidence in that strike capability?
Well, my worry is that some miscalculation would result in a shooting war. Nobody wants to go to war, but
the United States is not going to send an army of 500,000 men.
We're not going to do that.
Or a third of a million men to the Korean Peninsula ever again.
And Tony, let me ask you this. With China, do you think the president's tariff policies help exert pressure on China to do more on North Korea?
I think the Chinese need us more than we need them. I mean, think about all the economy they're now need our resources to go into. And
Trump needs those Midwestern states more than China does. So he's digging into a hole on tariffs.
On the tariff question, Trump's decided to play the hardball game with the Chinese, not the Europeans.
Right. Clarence, how do you see this playing out?
The Chinese all play the long game culturally. I mean, what we think of as a year is like a microsecond for them. They can be very patient when it comes to winning trade wars, which President Trump says are easy. We will see. I mean, he always thinks in terms of win-lose, whereas true diplomacy should be win-win. You try to come out with a situation where both sides feel like they had an advantage. And we can do that. Military is not the solution in Korea. It's merely a tool.
Trump thinks in terms of the next news cycle, and that's why he's having these frenzied rallies all over the place so he can dominate the news in those areas. Pardon me?
Quickly.
And the Chinese can actually put a driver in place with Dianne Feinstein for 20 years as a spy. You know,
all right. Well, anyway, when we come back, 3D guns and Pope Francis, and we'll continue that on the break. We're discussing Feinstein spies.
I was going to say
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. With gridlock in Washington, states are stepping in to mandate paid sick and family leave policies, creating a compliance nightmare for companies with a nationwide workforce. The ERISA Industry Committee is fighting back. Learn how we can help your company at Eric.org.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Issue 3, pontificating on the death penalty.
Pope Francis this week adapted Roman Catholic teachings on the death penalty to rule that it is morally inadmissible in all cases. The new understanding in the Catechism says the change is necessary because, quote, it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, end quote, and because there is, quote, an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes, end quote.
Pat, what does this mean for the future of the Roman Catholic Church?
Nothing really. What the Pope is expressing is his view that it is immoral. But you got 2,000 years of Catholic teaching by popes, doctors of the church, Aquinas. It has never been ruled to be a sin to use the death penalty. It's been argued by the last two popes that it ought to be rare in rare cases. But the Pope himself cannot create sins that do not exist in the gospel.
Let me
Yeah,
ask
but
him.
he
The
has
tradition of the
changed.
church.
He has changed the Catholic Catechism.
Well,
This is not
he's
just his
rewritten it, and they're
opinion.
going to rewrite it right back when he's
Oh,
gone.
so you're convinced that a more conservative pope will come in?
No, I mean,
I
look,
think
the
this
Pope
is significant.
The Pope can't change moral law.
He just did. He just rewrote the catechism that Catholics
and
follow.
now I have to be against the death penalty?
If you really want to honor life, it's very difficult to justify killing people for whatever they did if you forgive the sinner and all of that. And a lot of people have come around on that. And,
I know they have, Eleanor,
Fred
but we're
Barnes,
talking
who
about-
used to do this show, was very much opposed to abortion, and he became opposed to the death penalty as
But
well.
a lot of people
Much
have.
of the world is against the death penalty. And
But
where this is significant, it's for some politicians who are going to find trouble justifying it, but more often for
Eleanor.
judges. And Amy Barrett, Judge Barrett,
All
has already
Let's let
posed
Clarence
the
in.
point that
What about
Catholics would have,
Clarence.
excuse me please,
I hate to-
that Catholics would have to recuse themselves from these
Okay,
kind of
Clarence,
issues.
Nonsense.
I hate to interrupt when I agree with you.
Okay.
but I'm not Catholic, but I did know Cardinal Bernardine, Joseph Bernardine in Chicago, who back in the 80s came out with the ethos of the a seamless garment. He wanted a seamless garment ethos about life, which covered not just the death penalty, but abortion as well. And he said, like you just said, if you respect one, you should respect them all. And that had a lot of mileage. It didn't change the church, but it was an idea that gets out there and becomes part of the messaging that bishops may use or not use, and that has an influence, which I hear ringing out here again, an attempt to find a middle ground that can help the fragmented parts of the church on this doctrine.
All I can say, this is a step up from the 1458 Inquisition. I mean, this is real progress.
Don't get Pat on the
Clarence
Inquisition.
has got a good point when he said should. This is what Bernardine said. But we're talking about, can the Pope change moral law? No. Is he against the death penalty? He rewrote the catechism, but that does not change moral law.
And Pat, let me ask you a
Abortion has
question.
everywhere
Pat,
and always been
Pat,
wrong.
I need to ask Pat a question here. How do you read Pope Francis more broadly in terms of what he's teaching?
I think
He doesn't like it.
the Pope has introduced a tremendous amount of confusion into the Catholic Church by throwing out statements. For example, on homosexuality, they said, is it immoral? You know, how would I know, or something like that. And everybody believes that, but the Pope cannot change moral law. He just can't.
But he just rewrote the catechism, which a lot of people take very seriously. And new generations, he is speaking to new generations about changing social mores. And I think everyday people, everyday Catholics, not necessarily politicians, are going to take
Eleanor,
this to heart and are going to
talked
rethink
last
their
week
position.
about Judge Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh's a Catholic. So do you think this will have any impact on
No,
the Kavanaugh
it's
issue?
either
He would
say-
be the
He's not
fifth.
the
He
first.
would
I'm
be,
just
he
you know,
he
I
would
mean-
be the fifth Catholic on the court.
You
But
know-
I do think it does open the door. I mean, Jack Kennedy had to demonstrate that he wasn't going to take orders from the
Clarence.
Vatican.
Clarence.
And a new generation of Catholics may have to
right.
do the same thing.
Right, I agree. In fact, there are no Protestants on the court now, I believe, right? I mean,
No Druids either.
Things have changed.
Well,
yeah.
Gorsuch might be an evangelical Protestant.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe we will get a Druid.
I'm looking forward to Druids. I'm all
How
for
do you
that.
see, though, that, Pat, the Catholic Church, obviously Pope Francis has a lot of secular appeal, but
Enormous, yeah,
what
great
do you
deal.
what do you think the view is in the Catholic Church?
Catholic Church has been very divided since Vatican II, and there's a traditionalist wing of the Catholic Church. I mean, Scalia was a traditionalist Catholic, and Scalia was for the death penalty. I myself think, look, it ought to be very rare, because I was involved in a case where a guy was innocent and he almost died by hanging. But so you ought to check it closely, but you cannot say all of a sudden, hey, the death penalty is immoral.
If the church is divided and if there are questions about morality, I think we should mention the elephant in the room, and that's the rampant pedophilia within the church,
And right
which
in
has
this city.
created a lot of problems.
Right in this city. Listen, I agree with you. It's a horrendous scandal, and the Pope has not handled that well. And we have the case of the cardinal who's beloved in this city, Theodore McCarrick, who's involved in pedophilia, homosexual harassment of seminarians, and he's been removed from the cardinalate, and it was a disgrace to the church, and frankly, the Pope hasn't handled that one all that well.
All right, we're going to move on. Issue 4, 3D firearms.
Americans took to the internet this week to learn how to make their own plastic firearms. The blueprints for 3D firearms were temporarily listed online before being blocked by a federal court order. Libertarians say the firearm blueprint should be freely available, but Democrats say that course of action would unnecessarily and unjustifiably threaten public safety.
Clarence, is this a free speech issue, or should the government do more to regulate 3D firearms?
Well, of course, free speech and free press are at issue here, and also just as a practical matter, the guy who's pushing this, who I think is nutty, but it's still legal. As he mentioned, you can already go on the web and get the blueprints for these types of weapons. My question is, who wants to go to all that much trouble? I've watched 3D printing over at NASA. It's a very expensive process. I know a guy who can fix you up if you're looking for a gun. I mean, it's much easier.
I'll see you after the show.
Remember that?
Yeah, but this is it's really not a joking matter, because we are on the verge of 3D printers being able to make these things, and people can have these homegrown guns that can't be traceable, that don't have metal, get through metal detectors with plastic. Schools will be vulnerable. Planes will be vulnerable. The courts have to argue it out. The politicians have to do what they have to do, and they must.
So restrict free speech.
This is a false use of free speech. This is a weaponizing of free speech.
Tom. Let's talk ideology. 1967, after the Newark riots and the Detroit riot, the cover of the New York Review of Books, How to Build a Molotov Cocktail, exactly a model of the whole thing right there.
Anarchist handbook.
And somebody can do that right in their basement.
Right.
And that was all the liberals were defending that, so it's just an ideological position.
Oh,
Tony.
please. Oh, please.
Free press people.
Tony.
Excuse me.
No, it's Tony's turn.
I'm going to respond to this.
Very quickly.
This is payback to the liberals. That's how you see this issue.
No, I said
that
no.
is
All right,
totally
Tony's
absurd.
turn. Tony's turn.
Look. Anybody can build a firearm from scratch now. As a matter of fact, I brought something for you, Eleanor. You can start building your own.
I don't want it, thank you.
That's the beginning. I'm just saying this is what we're talking about. You cannot build a full 3D weapon out of plastic. You need a furnace of 2,500 degrees plus a Tom Steyer level $250,000 3D mental printer to build a firearm.
But what about Eleanor's point about the threat to planes, to aircraft, shooting out a window, for example?
You got 320 million guns out there available right now.
So what's a few more plastic ones?
There's more of a
Is that
danger.
what you're saying?
This one-shot little Vindicator weapon, that's nothing. I mean, one of you could pull it out right now, and the other two would pounce on it before they could get it out.
I feel like I'm on a coven of the NRA.
The danger is someone who's got security access smuggling in a weapon and getting it on a plane. That's the real shortcoming. And nothing you can do. So I clearance on this. The technology is nowhere near practical yet to quote unquote go to your house and print it off.
All right, well, seeing as Eleanor is the only voice here.
It's nowhere near practical yet, but it is coming, and now is the time you have to act to head this off. This is common sense. You don't want to make it easy. Pat, you can have all the guns you want. I don't want them. I'm not coming for them.
All right.
I want the government to protect me and the rest of the country.
Armalite 15 rifles out there.
I've got 3.
You're going to build a
have
plastic
fun,
gun
fellas.
and shoot down
Have
an
fun.
airliner.
Shoot everything you want. Have fun.
Clarence,
What was that Clint Eastwood movie? No,
in
The
the line
bad,
of
and the
fire.
ugly.
sorry.
In the line of fire.
In the
Oh,
line
that
of
too,
fire,
yeah,
You
that
could see
too.
John Malkovich make a plastic gun, and
What's a brave new? All right. Let's move on to another issue of the week. That is, and I'll ask you, Clarence. What do you take about the New York Times with this hiring choice of Sarah? I think what's her name? Young or?
Yeah, boy, the right wing sure is upset about this young woman's Twitter habits. I mean, this is a personnel matter at the Times, as far as I'm concerned. But the accusation is the Times must be racist because they hired a young woman who had made some snarky remarks about white people, which I've heard before. I'm sorry, I just cannot find a moral equivalency between
Let me say,
that
Clarence, if they
and
made
Mein
them
Kampf.
about black folks, the gal would be gone.
People do it all the time.
Eleanor, what's your read on
The New
this?
York Times
How
editorial
many
page.
Republicans do we show
right.
with their tweets like this? You know?
Eleanor.
I think Pat is just making the point that we carve out special places for black people. Is that what you said?
I'm saying that you don't insult black folks the way that gal insulted white folks.
Yeah, I mean,
Tony.
According to her tweet, according to her tweet, of us here, we three are hated simply because of our skin color. According to her tweet, white men should be essentially taken out and killed.
As Donald Trump would say, it was a joke.
Is that
it was a joke.
I'm sorry,
or as Donald Trump also would say, it's locker room talk. I mean, that's what it is.
Locker room.
I'm just amused to see so many people accuse me of being a snowflake because I try to protect people's feelings. And look how easily right-wing feelings are hurt. My friends at National Review and
my feelings aren't hurt. I don't say she should be fired.
All right.
She belongs up there.
Eleanor, concluding comment.
She said she was being sardonic and sarcastic. I'll
Do you
take
believe
her
it?
at his
Okay.
word. Let's see what her work is like.
All right. Well, on that note, we shall return bearing predictions.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. Is your company trying to provide health and retirement benefits to workers across the country? The ERISA Industry Committee beats back taxes, mandates, and compliance burdens that make it harder for companies to provide employee benefits. Learn how Eric supports large employers at Eric.org.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Predictions, Pat.
U.S. and Iran are drifting toward and being pushed toward a conflict in the Persian Gulf. I don't think the president wants it, and I think he'll stop it.
Eleanor.
Pope Francis's words on the death penalty will not change a lot of politicians' minds, Catholic politicians' minds, but it will cause everyday Catholics to rethink the rationale for when you take someone's life. As the Pope points out, we now have maximum security prisons. People can no longer be of any threat to anybody else.
Tony.
Team Mueller is going to blow the Manafort prosecution. I see some sort of a hung jury coming out of this. I think it's a very poor.
What does that mean for the president?
I think it's going to be a form of vindication, saying it's a witch hunt.
Okay, Clarence.
I think Omarosa Manigault's upcoming book, Unhinged, is going to be a bestseller, in which she claims that she detected some mental deterioration, and President Trump didn't have any evidence of this, but it's going to sell anyway.
Okay. And a mea culpa. I recently predicted that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly would leave his position this summer. This week we learned that Kelly is likely to stay for at least another year. So let me try my hand at history, where at least the facts are set. 160 years ago today, the first transatlantic cable was successfully laid across the Atlantic Ocean. It only survived a few weeks, but President James Buchanan and Queen Victoria of Britain were able to say hello via telegraph. How lovely. Today, many more cables cover the Earth's ocean floors, providing us with rapid communications. But somewhat ominously, Russia is conducting surveillance against transatlantic cables so as to deny the battle space in the event of a future war. Thank you for watching. We will see you next week.